Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. And you could call us CACI or CACI just about every day. Somebody asks me, is it one or the other? Our new CEO or our CEO is fine with either. So just a little bit more about CACI, a company of 25,000 strong, delivering expertise and differentiated technology that helps our national security mission partners across the IC. And we are trying ever vigilantly to ensure that we are able to innovate and bring long-standing excellence. And we're also proud to be one of Fortune's world's most admired companies. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the Reimagining Technology Acquisition Panel. This topic touches every corner of our community. The question we're all grappling with, I think, this afternoon for this panel is how do we get innovation to the mission, and how do we then do it at speed and scale? So today's moderator and speakers are going to dig into the issues and offer practical perspectives on what needs to change and how we get there. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. Evan Hickey, Senior Advisor to the Chief Technology Officer at CIA. William McHenry, Senior Advisor to the Director and the IC Lead for the Defense Innovation Unit, or DIU. Lieutenant Colonel Jeremy Leader of the Air Force, the Legislative Liaison for the Office of the Secretary of Defense in the Comptroller Budget and Appropriations Affairs area. And Candice Frost, retired Colonel, Vice Chair of INSA's Cyber Council and from Night Wing. Moderating the conversation is retired Lieutenant General Scott Berrier. Good to see you, Scott, who most recently served as the 22nd Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. General Berrier is a career intel officer, having served at the 2 at every level, from battalion to combat command. So if you would please welcome our panel and our moderator.
Please. So, good afternoon. I am compelled by lawyers and post-government employment restrictions to tell you something. So I'm going to tell you now that I am here as a retired flag officer, private citizen, and a member of the INSA board only. And now you know. But you're probably thinking the name Berrier is not synonymous with technology or acquisition. And you would be correct. I just had that conversation with Mark Mullen. But in the last 10 years on active duty, I spent a lot of time thinking about adversary technology, and I spent a lot of time thinking about how to protect our own technology. So I was tangentially around acquisition and technology for my entire career. The panel you see before you today represents the very best of what's happening in the world of acquisition technology today with a whole lot of expertise. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is sling it to my left for each of our panelists to give about a 3-minute overview of where they are in the world of this topic of reimagining acquisition, technology, and reform as we go forward in this new era in the new administration. So, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I feel like I'm amongst friends, especially Mac, who I feel like you're a senior advisor at DIU, but like a part-time senior advisor to Office of the Chief Technology Officer at CIA, because you've been by so much helping us out. About me. So I've been in the intel community for about 20 years now. I started at NSA, then went over to CIA. Wanted to go overseas, so I moved over to Department of State, did 3 tours, Paris, Belgium, and Iraq. Recommend the first 2 for vacation, not so much the last. Although I was very fit in Iraq and great tan. But I always wanted to come back to CIA, and I had the opportunity to help stand up the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, so Nund Mulchandani was named as the first CTO for CIA about 2.5 years ago. So it was a great opportunity for me to follow Nund there and help implement his vision of a CIA technology strategy for all of CIA. So why am I so interested in acquisition, I guess, is what you're probably wondering. Nund, one of the first things that he asked us to do was to look at innovation across the enterprise of CIA. Not really like good, bad, or indifferent, but just how do we innovate? Because as he says it, we do everything from like shoe phones to enterprise-scaled software. So it's a lot of diverse activity. That gave us, started us down like a multi-year journey of how do we onboard technology just in general. And I would say, from my perspective, as we talk about acquisition today, at CIA we look at it for like from 3 different or 4 different lenses when we onboard technology. There's the procurement executive aspect, there's the foreign ownership control and influence aspect, there's the security aspect of like clearing companies and clearing contractor personnel, and then there's also, of course, a cybersecurity aspect of getting something on the agency data network. There's also another tail to this where it's managing your portfolio and establishing clear priorities to make sure that even if you onboard something quickly, are you onboarding the right thing? And then how do I project my needs out to the solution providers, like the many people in this room? Really appreciate the time to be able to talk about that here today.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Mac?
Thanks, Scott. Ooh, that sounds boomy to me. I'm Mac. I'm Senior Advisor to the Director of the Defense Innovation Unit. Also lead the IC portfolio. I've been with DIU for about 5.5 years. Prior to that, I was an agency case officer and before simultaneously a Marine Colonel. Double retired from both. I don't think I have to say the same thing, but I'll just what he said earlier. Yeah, I think it's important to take a step back and say, why are we talking about acquisition? And why are we seeing such a flurry of activity? People are looking at the FAR. We're probably going to redo that. People are coming in behind the Defense Innovation Unit and other entities like that, InQtel, to really get after these problems. And the why is the important part. And the why is because we're in danger of losing our technology edge to peer adversaries. What edge we enjoyed is probably eroded, and that's across the board in artificial intelligence, autonomy, space, you name it. So, and why has that happened? Why have we lost our edge? It's because we've been executing a 1960s acquisition process in 2025 with no consequences. You go back to what made sense in 1960, it no longer makes sense, but we haven't updated it. We've chewed a little bit at the edges of it. We've got the Defense Innovation Unit, we've got some of these other things, but we really haven't revamped it. And it's to our own detriment because that process was built for a time when the government had the best technology. We could go to Silicon Valley, which didn't exist at the time, and say, hey, Hewlett-Packard, build this for us. Well, now Google alone outspends the entire US government on artificial intelligence research. And if we can't leverage that and bring that in quickly and put it to good use, we're probably not going to do well in a peer conflict. So that's the why. Now, then we can get a little bit more into the how. Quick background on DIU. 2015, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter said, hey, we've lost the bridge between Silicon Valley, high tech, and the government. We need to fix it. They sent out a small team to Silicon Valley and said, hey, let's start having conversations. We used to have conversations. They went out, they bought the hoodies, put on the vans, got comfort dogs, and started breaking down those barriers. And it was not an insignificant task, but there was a lot of hostility. But we started having conversations. Former Director Mike Brown comes in and says, okay, great, we're having these conversations, but to what end? And what he supposed is that we could take an existing government problem, rapidly run a commercial solutions open to everyone, prototype the solution, and then scale it across government. We call that DIU 2.0. That was successful over 100 times, 100 different production contracts written. Doug Beck comes in as the current director and works with the Secretary of Defense and says, hey, we're having these conversations, we're able to buy things, bring them in quickly to solve problems. Now let's do it at scale. And that's where DIU 3.0, and that's where we are today.
Thanks for that, Mac. Appreciate it. Jeremy.
Well, thanks for having me. Lieutenant Colonel Jeremy Leader. I'm probably wondering why the heck is a legislative liaison invited to this, but I have a very odd, diverse background. Actually, I'm a government civilian with the Space Force as the Deputy Director of the Commercial Space Office. And then on the reserve side, normally I'm a cyber ops officer, but I was pulled into active orders to do this job for a couple of years. So it was a great opportunity, especially to help implement some of the changes we've been working at the Commercial Space Office. One of the barriers is actually how Congress appropriates money. So it's not just acquisition reform; it's also PPBE reform. I think is extremely important to help implement, get that change going forward. I was going to say, there are three constants in life: death, taxes, and acquisition reform. Because we talk about an old system from the Cold War, but there are clamorings of needs for acquisition reform. as far back as you look at, as long as there's been government procurement. I mean, even there's a memo in the early 60s from Werner von Braun, the vice president, talking about how he needs special contract authorities if they're going to do the moon mission. So it's the need's been there almost forever, and I think there is a value in perpetually looking at how can we do it better.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy. Candice.
All right, so I'm your technical expertise, a little bit of salt, a little bit of tech, and I'll kind of focus my efforts on where I see acquisition moving on the technical side. I would say I have to do a shout out. My interest in acquisition started with General Berrier when I was put in charge of Intel Support to Acquisition, and one of my members, way back when, Dwayne Hines is here in the audience. So you see how it all comes full circle. So Dwayne at the end is going to grade me on how much I know acquisition now, because we served together about a decade ago. But I would say our challenge isn't always the lack of tools or lack of acquisition support. Sometimes it's a lack of urgency and alignment. And that's selfishness maybe on the business part. It's selfishness based on rice bowls. But we have got to look at, if a mission is operationalized, how can we do that within the acquisition cycle to meet the same needs? So that means trust, speed, and mission relevance. If you can, and some of these gentlemen on the stage here have done a great job of infusing the user all the way up to the purchaser and the decider, having a much smaller feedback loop, I think that's one area in national security that really does need effectively moving faster with emerging technology. The other area with speed is Coy Wen, on behalf of Cyber Command, the J9, he said speed is the new metric for relevance. And so if we look at cyber and emerging technology, we don't have the luxury of measuring things in years. We have the luxury or urgency of measuring things in mere months and sometimes days. And so how we can move that fast is who we partner with. I'm here on behalf of Nightwing, not in my old military uniform or service, but I would say looking at partners that can move at that speed and scale is incredibly important. And the breakthrough capabilities that we continue to focus on, AI, I heard the last panel, rock it out, but quantum, autonomy, we've already mentioned in data fusion. If there is a way that private sector really can be encouraged outside of defense channels to partner, I think the method of OTAs right now is a really great move to move faster, but it's got to be done with trust and accountability. And sometimes people outside the government just don't understand the need for trust, especially we've got some Intel professionals on stage here. Trust matters because that equals lives. And the last part I'll kind of talk to is just cultural change, as well as some of the structural reform. Professionals need to take managed risk. Those who continue to serve our government take risks every day on behalf of the operation and mission. So how do we empower them through some kind of adaptive acquisition framework is critically important. So I think we do make a decision with respect to the speed of operations, but it starts with the partnerships of both government and private companies as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Candice. So we're gonna tee up some questions here, and the first two that I have teed up, we could probably stay on this for the entire panel here, or even go beyond. And we are well coordinated. So I'm gonna ask Evan first. If you had a blank slate to develop new government acquisition standards and processes from the ground up, where would you start?
Sure, and I would further emphasize Candice's point. I really do think empowering, like there's a big cultural perspective here. So, as we discussed the improvements or the things that I would change, I would say no matter what you do, if the workforce isn't empowered to actually go after that managed risk and actually make a procurement or an acquisition, it's going to fail. We have many ways by which we can acquire new technologies, and we have this like break glass in case of emergency at CIA. Well, why do we keep replacing the glass? It's like, okay, why doesn't this just become a standard with a threshold that you can deploy? But if I were to change things, definitely simplification of the FAR. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward document, but it's 2,100 pages, so not exactly light reading. It does seem like the FAR 2.0 rewrite that's underway right now is going to be moving in that direction, which I think is really great. For us at CIA, I think that for us to improve our acquisition ability to acquire technology, we'd have to look at like integrated pathways with cross-functional teams, because again, right now we've got procurement executives that should team with people who understand foreign control and ownership control and influence. I think we can do many processes in parallel. So as I mentioned, the cybersecurity, the security, foreign ownership and procurement processes sort of in tandem rather than sequentially. And then finally, I think a big push that we're trying to make is shifting much more to the external rather than the internal. So, the thing that I like to think about is like TSA PreCheck. That is a fantastic service. I opt into this. I pay a little bit of extra money, but I'm cleared. I get to go on a fast path. I feel like there's an opportunity here for us to leverage the private sector to create sort of a fast path and a pre-cleared pathway for people to onboard technology for CIA. But those are just some of the things that I guess we're looking at. But yeah, so that's where
I love the TSA PreCheck line.
Yeah,
That's catchy. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Mac, ground up.
Yeah, quick question. Is everyone familiar with DIU? Hands? How about the CSO process that DIU executes? The one SecDef just mandated for all software purchases across DoD. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the CSO process, but it'll touch on some of these things. And please see me afterwards if you have any questions. That's what I'm here for. All right, if we're reimagining an acquisition process, what does it need to be? Let's break it into buckets. We want to be able to pull in the best technology, right? So it's got to be open. I'll say all, but I don't really mean all. I mean supply chain, trusted companies, those types of things. Because we want to be able to sort through those and pick the best process, best company, right? The best technology. That's one. Two, it's got to be fast. I mean, the time from capability gap identified to capability fulfilled in DoD is 10 years. Like, think of the technology that you had in your pocket 10 years ago. It's not good. So it's got to be fast. Three, it's got to be secure. And we talk about supply chain. We talk about if we need cleared individuals. We need to know what we're putting into our F-35, what we're bringing into CIA headquarters. It's got to be all those things. That's not that difficult. I mean, companies do this on a routine basis. So maybe we can take from the commercial sector some of these best practices, come up with a FAR that's 15, 20 pages instead of 2,000. The other things we need to look at is we need to look at our acquisition officers and contract officers. Where are the incentives and where are the carrots and where are the sticks? If you come in on time, on budget, do you get promoted? Yes. If you don't come in on time and on budget, do you get promoted? Yes. Maybe if we said, hey, with the POM process, we've got $2 million for this project. If you come in at 1.7, then your individual agency gets to keep some of that and just use it for whatever. So we need to think about the carrots and incentives in any process. Right now, there are none. They're all pointing in the wrong direction. On the first day at Defense Acquisition University, they give you the FAR, which if you printed it out would be head high. And on the second day, they say, hey, if you break any of these, you're criminally liable. So if the FAR is a box, as big as this stage, people are operating right here, right in the middle. I'm not going to take a risk. Why would I take a risk? So we need to think about those incentives and those, I don't want to say punishments because that's a hard word, but the other side of that.
Okay, a 15-page FAR is coming. All right, Jeremy.
In the previous panel, I talked about big data sources. I think you just named one right there. I will say that, yeah, we definitely operate with that spotlight, but that spotlight moves to whatever the tool du jour is. I know OTAs were mentioned earlier. Again, that's just one tool of many. There's times you should use it, times you shouldn't. But I also think that, the FAR is also a resource for to be able to do things if you're just willing to dig into it a little bit. So if I had a blank slate, I will say that this has been tried multiple times before. Actually, the last time that I recall, the 2016 NDAA, when they created Section 804, what we now term middle tier acquisition. for rapid prototyping and rapid fielding. That was a blank, like, hey, here's a blank slate, what do you need? It took the department 2 years to actually come up with regulations to implement that law, and those regulations look very similar to the existing DoD 5000 process. So, you know, I know Congress gets blamed for being slow, part of that 10-year cycle, but in reality, the laws are passing faster than the regulations can keep up with. So there's definitely an opportunity there to not be our own worst enemy as we develop those rule sets. So, but I think a blank slate, I would go back to values. You know, things that we value not only within the department, but as a country, competition, free markets, right? So like the things that I think you have to start with those values, and then you incentivize, like you were talking about, incentivize things that are built around those values. If maybe speed is that value that will at least drive the change, but I think historically, cost as an independent variable has been the primary driver and has kind of put us into that situation that we're currently in.
Okay, thanks. Candice, you're in charge, ground up, blank slate.
Blank slate, I will take a slice of everybody. I'm going to take Mac's point on security and dive into that. I'd flip things a little bit. Of course, from my cyber perspective, I would really try to embed cybersecurity at almost every point, every stage. It should never be a bolt-on at the end. And the other part is testing. If you don't have users as test case throughout, it's just a good idea, but at the very end, then you're trying to teach someone a very complex system, and the user wouldn't be able to have had the experience of a test and learn environment. So I think that part, and also mirroring kind of those dual-use commercial technologies on the outside, if it can work from 0 to 100 with the general public, it should be able to work with our service members. So kind of incorporating that for the real-world conditions into what we're doing would be incredibly helpful.
Okay, thanks, Candice. All right, this is a follow-on question about what's happening now, and I think, Mac, you're probably closer to it than any of us in your current position. But what positives in streamlining in the acquisition processes have we seen since the new administration took over? Like, what's the latest?
Yeah, I don't know. But it doesn't mean I won't talk about it. Yeah, you know, that's what the administration plans to do with the FAR and other things. That's being closely held. But I think there's some pretty good indicators out there. I mentioned the SecDef's memo on software acquisition. And then you've got the president's executive order on the adoption of commercial technology. The interesting thing is, how many people realize that there's a law that already exists that the government has to buy existing commercial tech if it's out there? Yep. Yeah. No, that's a real law. How many people have gone to jail for breaking that law? Yeah. Go back to that incentives and the other part piece. So there is a focus. There's a focus on efficiency. If you look at some of the way the government's currently looking at the contracts it's holding, they're going back in, taking a hard look at those. The FAR will be revised at some point. When that happens, I don't know. What I expect, and this is Mac talking as a personal citizen, not as a DIU employee, I think we're going to see a streamline. I think we're going to see a focus on speed. I think we're going to see a focus on commercial adoption. Those three things I expect to be in there. What it exactly will look like, I don't know.
Yes, so I definitely tracking the commercial law. I'm also tracking the Buy America Act, right? So, you know, when you waive something enough and/or, you know, back to that cost as an incentive, and you know, all that capability gets shipped overseas to where there no longer is something American to buy. Again, how did we get to where we are? Through a series of choices that we just need to, you know, own, and then maybe we don't give out waivers for that the way we used to, if there actually is a capability. But I actually did print out, because I was not going to be able to remember, there are 7 executive orders that have come out since the end of March. So when we talk about, you know, the department, our own regulations getting in our way, I will definitely say this administration is leaning on towards action versus inaction. But those 7 executive orders: ensuring commercial cost-effective solutions in federal contracts, ensuring national security, economic resilience, through processed critical minerals, derivative products, restoring common sense to federal procurement, modernizing defense acquisitions and spurring innovation in the defense industrial base, restoring America's maritime dominance. Now, that one has a very specific AOR there, but still there's a lot of acquisition-related, contract-related language in that one. Reforming foreign defense sales to improve speed and accountability, and then the last one, establishing the United States Investment Accelerator. So there is definitely a lot going on in the executive order realm, and I hope, and I am fairly positive that we will have regulation and direction within the department in much less than 2 years.
Great. There will be a test on those 7 executive orders so I hope you took notes. Okay. Anyone else have a thought on that particular question? Otherwise, we can move on. Okay, let's move on. So this next topic will probably appeal more to the audience than perhaps other questions, so here it goes. What changes to acquisition strategies are needed to create meaningful competition so that non-traditional companies can scale and succeed along legacy primes without compromising reliability or security? Candice, you want to take that one?
Sure. I'll start with competition is the lifeblood of capitalism, and that's a very good thing. But that also means in our government, because we have the Buy America Act and we have a very smaller competitive, we've got to look at the playing field and how we make sure it's not one-sided and just not a straight field up. So I think modular contracting would allow smaller vendors to kind of plug in with very defined outcomes. I know we have done that a lot with the innovation units and some on the technical side, but there are plenty of other environments that are out there, whether you're buying wrenches, screws, parts for just labor that don't necessarily have that kind of boutique nature. And so how do we layer that so the endless security, even though I'm the cybersecurity person, doesn't put up too many hurdles? I think that's a huge, big part. It doesn't mean we're going to lower the standard. It just means how do we bring up a capability, maturity, and a mission relevance of acquisition purchasing.
Great, thanks. I'm going to go to Evan next in your experience because I think your organization probably deals with smalls a lot.
Yeah, and Nun's experience in Silicon Valley for 20 years, building 4 very successful startups, and then joining DoD, and then joining us. He's brought a really unique perspective in how to engage and diversify your contractor base. I mean, for us, he's really treating contracts as like seed funding for small startups, right? So like, let's try out smaller companies and startups. Let's engage with them as they prove themselves out. Let's push it down to the lowest classification level possible. As they prove themselves out, let's continue to invest in them. Sort of that modular contracting approach, which I think is great. We're also engaging groups like DIU or InQtel who do this really, really well. They're out there tech scouting. They have a great lay of the land and market map of solution providers. So I'd say those are probably our 2 focus areas for diversifying our contractor base and
awesome.
Doing that.
Yeah, thanks. Mac, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to think about this sort of the barriers. So you're a small company. You've got cutting edge tech. Maybe you come out of DARPA, maybe you come out of Stanford, MIT, something like that. You start a company and you say, hey, I'm a patriot. I want to do business with the government. What are the barriers that exist for you to do business with the government? One, you probably got investors, so they want return on the money. We've got that 10-year timeline that I talked about. So speed to contracting is probably one barrier. But let's get past that. How about security clearances? If you want to do business in the IC, most of the IC problem sets are classified. So you can't even see what the problems are. There's some ways to get in DIU and InQtel that you mentioned, but you can't even really see the problems, a lot of them. 3, you don't understand how the government buys things. I mean, who do I talk to? We've got these SIBRs, we've got this, can I go down this road? What's an OT? How do I do that? Meanwhile, I've got investors beating down my doors. So I think we need to take these barriers one at a time and address those first. Okay, speed, we can work on with the new FAR. 2, how are we going to get folks cleared? Or are our problem statements really all need to be classified? We worked with NSA for the last couple of years, and the top 10 problems that came out of NSA in the EQTEL brief last week, they were all unclassified. Because there are no classified technologies, or very, very few. There's classified use cases, right? So can we obfuscate what our use case is and still get our problem statements out there? If we want to attract these companies one by one, the government and individual agencies and activities are going to have to overcome those barriers and think holistically about it.
Jeremy, any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, back to, I think you described one of the ingredients to DIU success is short-circuiting the requirements process and getting back to that higher level problem statement, I think is extremely important. And because when you do look at how the government currently buys things, requirements drive resourcing and budgets, and they drive everything else. And sometimes they're written in such a way that drive us to a solution, or they drive us to an acquisition strategy that may look initially good, but then again, when you take a lot of these over all the departments, they're developed for a system and not necessarily a mission capability. More often than not, they all down select to one provider for an indefinite period of time, or 20, 30-year timeframes. How do you ever expect competition to actually exist if you're going to do a 5-year contract and then 10-year sole source contracts after that? So Space Development Agency is a great example of changing the center to 3-year centers, to where maybe you don't win this competition, but the window for the next one's already open. So you need to actually have activities that people can actually bid on, and they're not shut out forever.
Great. We're going to change it up slightly here. We're going to talk about our competitive advantage. And I was asked this question a lot as director of DI. Did we have a technological competitive edge over China, and were they gaining on us? And so this question really comes from the Strategic Edge report that argued that the U.S. has used up the margin of advantage we once owned, and calls for an alternative pipeline outside the traditional procurement system to field emerging tech and speed at scale. Candice, what do you think about that statement?
So I think the report itself is worth actually looking into. I know acquisition can be a little dry. I mean, even we admit it up here. It's not always the most alluring thing, but the Strategic Edge report does nail the fact of urgency, the speed and scale that's definitely needed. But they talk about a 5% set aside. And if that 5% set aside, it allows you to have a viable alternative pipeline. That is a method that I think would tie directly into that mission sponsorship of what someone needs. The other area set aside is a greater part, but it's got to be accompanied by some kind of agile mechanism where the acquisition community can see, okay, how can we touch it? How can we test it? Cyber red team it to death, and then a path to scale. You can always create one bespoke thing, but actually, going outside of just funding a science project, how do we grow this? And I think that's a big part, that if we can meet the needs of that, it would move things along.
Okay, let's just come up the line here. Jeremy.
I'm going to go back to the statement I made about the FAR, where there's actually an opportunity to do a lot of things in there if people really get to know what's in there. I think this is kind of I'm afraid of throwing the baby out with the bathwater on that type of statement, saying just we need a separate path. We already have a lot of paths. Pick your poison. But the 5% set aside, again, and I'm not speaking as a government official here, these are just personal perspectives, but I think that, again, arbitrary dollar set aside is not necessarily the best way to going to solving some of that. I think that leveraging commercial dual use technology is a better construct, because then if the government isn't there to basically pay for 100% of a product, there's other markets that will ensure that it doesn't disappear.
Got it. Okay, Mac, I know you have an opinion on this. Have we used up the margin of advantage we once owned?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent we have, but that's good. I mean, when you play your best ball is hopefully in the fourth quarter, tied score, right? we have a huge competitive advantage over our peer adversaries. And that's just the nature of our culture. We are competitive. We don't have a tech problem. We have a technology adoption problem, but that's easier to solve. And when you compare a free and open society and how it innovates compared to a closed society, that's not even close. So what we need to do is take advantage of those competitive advantages, speed adoption, do those things, and we'll absolutely come on top.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, agree emphatically with Mac's perspective. I also agree on the sense of urgency from the report. I think we do already have many pathways. It just requires a mindset sort of switch. I think you've all probably worked with a range of contracts officers in your life. You know, some are more mission focused or responsive than others. So I think if we can sort of inspire that level of responsiveness, I think we have many pathways available to us to meet mission needs.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to get to some of your questions here. The first one is titled Speed, Contracting, and Scale. Mac mentioned economics of scale. How do we overcome our current dependence on imported tech without emptying our coffers? And how do we produce American at scale? Mac, to you first.
Yeah, I think in some ways that's not really applicable to software. I think when you get into our industrial base, we made a bet as a nation. We said, hey, we can offshore a lot of our industrial base to different places, and that will change those societies. That turned out to be an incorrect bet, and it arguably to the detriment of our economy. Some countries that haven't done that, Korea, Germany, have been relatively successful with their manufacturing. I think you're seeing with this administration, we're going to bring some of that stuff back. We're talking about bring shipbuilding back, bringing a lot of the automotive stuff back, bringing back that industrial capacity, I think will be key for us being competitive in the future.
Okay, this one is for our good Lieutenant Colonel on stage. What is one major reform that you believe is possible for inclusion in the FAR 2.0 that you hope to see?
Oh, wow.
If you need a lifeline, you can ask for it.
Well, so the issue here is there's a lot of interesting legislation out there that I can't, lobby for one way or the other. But I just will say that, definitely looking at the intent to make change is there. Now, there's always going to be some unintended consequences for some of these reforms. So I would just, without citing a specific example, I'm very wary of some of those unintended consequences, especially when it comes to commercial and dual use.
Okay, we'll leave that one on the table for right now. Candice, to you. Buying commercial solutions sounds great, but we often have done that and had the cost jack way up. Yep. How do we encourage innovation without penalizing the taxpayer later?
So I think the biggest area is just, oh my gosh, I'm going to go back to the FAR. Using the actual FAR acquisition tools of rapid prototyping. So right now, I did bring a lot of notes just because so many changes have happened so fast. Mm-hmm. But I know that OTAs will use 4022, that's prototype servicing, and then 4023 experimentation. So I was just out at Space Symposium 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about the cost of this is so exponentially large, and the speed of which almost all of it is in the private sector, no longer in the public sector. How do we use that? Well, if you start to use accounting and almost up to fractal math, you're able to see the satellite and the cost of the satellite itself in terms of dollars and percentages. Some of the software used, especially on the cybersecurity side, it meets that funding level with respect to prototype services and experimentation that I wouldn't be able to do without creating my own small business to be able to do these things. So what I would say in that long term is there are some things in the FAR that kind of help at a smaller scale, even though I am all about speed. You've got to be able to use the confines in which we find ourselves right now.
Okay, thank you. Evan, this one's going to you. No pressure. Given the current well-known, very long, slow acquisition process, how do you see the new acquisition process speeding up to allow AI, quantum technologies, adopted quicker to roll out, quicker to roll out?
Yeah, well, I would say again, so that we've received, based on these executive orders, a signal from the White House, from this administration, that they want agility, they want responsiveness. I think we are well on the way towards this path with the executive orders, with the reform to the FAR, and I think they are instilling across the government that, the recent one, the executive order as recent as last week that came out was for all of government. So there's a renewed focus on efficiency, agility. So I think this is, we are well on our pathway to do that and adopt those tools, which should further help us adopt new technology.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, great questions from the audience. Keep them coming, appreciate that. We're going to switch it up now and talk some specific technology. So here's a question about battery technology, microchips, et cetera. What about capabilities like battery technology, microchips, access to critical minerals? How can you reimagine a way to streamline acquiring these given today's challenges? I'm going to go to our Air Force brother here on stage.
Yeah, so I think battery technologies, it was said in the last panel talking about like modular nuclear reactors. I will say, even though the commercial sector does a great job of innovation, that IARPA and DARPA still do great work too. And they need to get credit where credit's due. So innovation can happen in the government still. But there's some interesting opportunities, I think, with, again, it's not just batteries, there's power generation. There are commercial companies that are doing space-based solar power. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities that kind of play into that entire power cycle, that it's not just batteries and miniaturization. I think there's a lot of technology that is around that area that is very interesting.
Okay, Mac, I'm going to ask it another way. Battery tech, microchips, critical minerals, we need them
Yes,
fast,
sir.
now,
Yes, sir. Yes,
more
sir.
of them.
Yeah, I think it goes back to incentives and barriers. Like, we have tons of critical minerals. The Salton Sea is full of critical battery technology minerals. Can we get to them? Or what are the barriers? California environmental concerns, those types of things. Those things make those things cost inefficient. How about shipbuilding? Can we revitalize our shipbuilding? Yeah, it's just a question of incentives and barriers on the other side. So if you look at some, where we buy our ships, what ships can come into the U.S. ports, where the technologies for those ships come from. A chip foundry, billions of dollars in startup costs. Are we incentivizing shipbuilding in the U.S.? Yeah, we're starting to. We saw that a little bit under the last administration. We're starting to see it more and more with this administration. I think that's going to be critical going forward because the market will react to those incentives and those barriers going forward.
Candice, we need more battery tech, more microchips, more critical minerals. How are you going to do it?
So how I would do it is, again, we're a capitalist society, and there becomes a point where the free market will determine and set a certain amount that is needed. But that's the beauty of understanding national security in the government. It's not as important, let's say, for the 99.9% of America that, let's be honest, will never know what INSA stands for. But the 1% of us that do, the 1% of America or less, 0.1, that do understand why INSA is so incredibly important, just as those minerals are and batteries are, we're the ones that need to ensure that we're informing our elected officials to either understand and pre-negotiate whether it's a surge contract, to make sure that there is a long-term buying strategy, which doesn't exist right now, and that we continue what the last administration did with the CHIPS Act and encourage the development of that across all of America. I know I'm seeing that right now out at Dulles with all of the facilities that are being built all around. So that AI can continue to run as well.
Got it. Evan, your organization's interested in battery tech. How are you going to get bigger, faster, stronger, smaller?
Yeah, agree with everything that the panelists said. I would just say, further say this is, treat it like a strategic infrastructure, treat it like a national security asset. What do we do for like nuclear submarines, right? I mean, we find a way with which to create or procure these things. So I would put it in a special category as well and find a way to get it done.
Awesome, okay.
One quick add, just in terms of like the mechanisms to get this technology faster. I have not mentioned the Office of Strategic Capital. So again, it's not just the government that has to pay for these things and make these large investments like the CHIPS Act. But you know, having the opportunity to give loan guarantees to either companies or those seed funders that then fund those companies, there's a lot of other options that are out there to get resources to those folks.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, if I can riff off that a little
go
bit. Yeah, so the Departments of Defense's research and RDT&E budget last year was circa $140 billion. There was $330 billion of venture capital that went into companies last year. The common question I get from companies, from capital, whether that's venture capital, private equity, is what does the government want? You know, if we can signal those markets that, hey, we're ready to buy US-made battery technology, you know, that money will move. It's desperately waiting for some type of signal. So let's take advantage of the private capital that's out there in the United States to go after some of these significant technologies.
Okay, we're going to switch gears here in our final few minutes and talk about DoD and centralization. Centralization could be a dirty word depending on where you're from and what time reference you have, but let's ask this question. What are the potential benefits and drawbacks of centralizing procurement functions within the DoD, and how can we ensure that such centralization does not stifle innovation or responsiveness? Mac, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, so we mentioned agility a little bit earlier. We have to be agile at the baseline acquisition level. So you're talking maybe in the different ICs that might be individual offices. You know, they know what they need. They know what they want to buy and what solutions. We've got to enable that, but we've also got to do checks and balances. You know, think about Salesforce. A friend of mine is a Salesforce representative to an individual IC entity. He's talking to 36 different offices and probably will write 36 different contracts for what is an enterprise solution. That doesn't make sense. So how do we differentiate from the speed and agility that we need at the working level and the checks and balances that we need at a higher level? We've mentioned the CTO's offices. A number of IC agencies, DoD activities have created a CTO. But are they using them right? How does a CTO work at a company? Do you think the CTO has sign-off authority on acquisition of technology? Yeah, of course. I mean, why would you have one if they don't have that? Do they set the priorities at the enterprise level for that entity, that company? Yeah, absolutely. Are we doing the same in the IC and DoD? No, we're not. They don't have the acquisition authority. They don't have the checks and balances. They don't have the same controls that they have at a company that would allow them to be effective. So if we're going to have CTOs, which is a fantastic idea, maybe we need to bring them into the acquisition process and give them those checks and balances without stifling that agility we need at the individual office level.
Great. Jeremy, do you have thoughts on benefits, drawbacks of centralizing procurement functions in DoD?
Yeah, in the Air Force they say centralized control, decentralized execution. It's a great saying. I've never seen it work effectively. I think there's value in both. But kind of like in the previous panel when they were talking about compute at the edge versus centralized compute, there's value in both. So I think a federated model makes a lot more sense where when you have to bring things back for some centralized reason, you have that capability. But then you also have the ability to, you know, give out mission command to the people that are closer to the tactical edge to do those types of things that those local CTOs need to do.
Got it. Candice, any thoughts on centralization?
I'll tag on with what Jeremy said. It is a little bit like cloud computing. You can have centralized control but decentralized access. And so if we are looking at a procurement ability to either have like local experimentation, making sure that cyber oversight always occurs, but we can't have the death of innovation, which is the one size fits all.
Any thoughts on that?
We say the same thing all the time. Centralized intent, but decentralized execution. So completely agree. I mean, using that centralized intent to create standards, which should then help produce faster acquisition. Sort of like centralizing the boring stuff, whether it's compliance or vendor vetting or cyber standards, but then letting the sort of the innovators decentralized go after their mission prerogative. So yeah.
Okay. One from the audience, and Evan, I'm going to shoot this one to you first. Is there a single technology solution that could be adopted across the IC today for streamlining and cost savings moving forward? A single technology solution. Doesn't say what it's for.
Yeah. And, I mean, I guess the hot topic of the day is AI, and
Yeah.
which can be applied to so many different things. I mean, I think what we're working on right now, while we are looking at specific technologies that we can deploy at CIA. We are also looking, again, sort of the boring stuff, the policies, the procedures, and actually working with other IC agencies and the ODNI on ways that we can do things smarter, which should produce gains for the workforce. So,
Awesome. Mac, your thoughts on that? A single technology solution that could be a game-changing technology?
Nothing jumps to mind. Everybody talks about like quantum zero day, so I could throw that out. That's the time when quantum computers can break existing algorithms. That's going to be pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Jeremy?
I always think back to this book that I read called The Box that talks about the standardization of cargo crates for multimodal transportation of goods. I think it's probably something a lot more logistically basic than some of these high-tech things that we get bombarded with every day.
Candice?
Compute power. Compute is the new ammunition of the future.
I would have asked this question a little differently, and I would have said, what is the technology that will allow us to take all of those wonderful things that NRO does from space, think of all the programs they have, to inject into the oncoming DI program Mars, to connect that program to Maven, to give every combatant commander a single pane of glass situational update on what's happening around the world with all the bad guys that we know. What is the technology that is going to integrate all that Title 50 data at speed, in varying different classifications levels, to be able to deliver to our combatant commanders and to partners around the world? If anybody has that technology solution, please see me afterwards.
Crystal ball.
Any thoughts on the integration of Title 50 with Title 10 outcomes?
Yeah, so
That was not scripted. We're off script right now. So.
all right. It's sensing and sense-making. Those are the two things I think you're talking about in a general sense. How do we sense what we need to sense, and how do we make sense of what we've already sensed? It's a lot of sensing. In that understanding, distill that understanding. The technology exists to do that at scale. I mean, we've been talking JADC2 now. I think I wrote an article on it like 3 years ago. Like, the technology has existed to be able to pull in all that data, make sense of that data, and rapidly distill it into something that we can understand on a battlefield or as a combatant commander. I'd say it's not rocket science, but it's partially rocket science. The question is, go back to the barriers of why we don't have it. We've got Project Convergence, Overmatch, the JAKE, when it existed, before it became CDAO, was playing in it. All these are different entities and talking to each other in a limited fashion, and certainly not bringing in our allies to have those conversations. So going back to the barriers, we can do that as a nation. It's just, how do we overcome the barriers to do it?
I think there's some barriers as well, just in terms of business incentives. So when you actually start looking at some of the technologies that play into CJADC2, a proprietary waveform over here can't talk to this thing over here. Mm-hmm. So why was that even ever developed in that manner? Again, there was a business incentive to do something like that. So modular open system architecture sounds great, but without the business incentives to also ensure that companies that are innovating can make money, and don't lose their IP, I think is a balance that we have not figured out yet. But I think that we definitely need to attack the business incentives piece.
Somebody should figure it out. Candice, what do you think? I've seen you frustrated over this before.
Oh, very much so. And now that I'm on the other side and I get to see companies that can do things in multiple ways, it's like if there were just a way for more companies that have phenomenal technology, especially in whether it's warfighter visualization or different technological methods that they've used to be able to talk to the end users, and having those users as a part of the acquisition decision, it's got to tie in a lot closer together.
Gotcha. And I'm going to put my Title 50 guy on the spot here. If you have thoughts, if you don't, just blink twice.
Blinking twice, aggressively. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. We have a couple of minutes just left in the forum here, and I guess I'll start down on the end with Candice. Let's give us your closing thoughts about this topic and where you think we're going.
So again, I'm going to put the cyber nerd hat on, and just to say that cyber resilience starts and is a part of the entire ecosystem and spectrum of the acquisition community. And so when it's treated like a redheaded stepchild, no offense here, then it will perpetuate. That was a joke. I'm trying, guys. It's late in the afternoon. Let's all be honest with ourselves. This is a rough panel to have late after lunch. But what I would say is it is incredibly important that whether it's the CTO, the CIO, that you have someone that understands the immediacy and the urgency, so that Salt Typhoon, any other bad, nefarious actor is not a part of the ecosystem in our systems that we are developing here.
Great.
So one of the phrases that was coined when I was at the Commercial Space Office is exploit what we have, buy what we can, and build only what we must. And we got very focused on the processes that we needed to tackle to make that happen. But I would say that one of the things that we quickly identified was that the processes were actually not the most difficult thing. A lot of it was culture and incentives. So I definitely think that those are extremely important, and it doesn't happen overnight, but at the same time, it does take some continuous pressure. I'm just glad that a lot of senior leadership across the department, as well as the Hill, is willing to accept change.
Awesome. Thanks. Mac.
Yeah, going back to that 30,000-foot level, this is a great time, to have this conversation. I've been at DIU for 5.5 years. When I showed up, I couldn't spell acquisition. I still can't spell acquisition, but all the conditions are in place for us to make changes. We've got a peer adversary that's catching up with us, if not caught up with us. We've got an explosion of technology with AI, cyber, quantum. All those things are saying, hey, we can take advantage of it. And there's, looking back at my time at DIU, when I first came to DIU, it was hard to have conversations still with the commercial tech sector. Now they're beating down the government's doors. So this is a fantastic opportunity and a fantastic time to be having these conversations, to be executing. I think in the next year, we're going to see fundamental change on how the government buys things, and that's going to open up the doors for us to leverage that commercial tech advantage that we have going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Mac. Evan, your
Yes,
thoughts?
I agree emphatically with that as well. I think this is probably in my 20 years in the IC, I think this is one of the most exciting times to be in government. I think we are looking at transformational change, not just in our organization, but in many different IC agencies. I see many of the people in this room as part of the solutions and the solution providers for that change. Acquisition is going to play a big role in that. And so, yeah, I'm excited for the next several years.
Awesome. Well, I see Suzanne down there. She's writing me a note saying, Scotty, that was the best panel of the day. Really awesome. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists up here. Well done, guys. Thank you.